Start now. So, as we talked about last time, this is the first of 4 sort of topic lectures. There will be no homework, no grading, no questions about any of the material here. They're just fun topics that I thought you might like to hear about. And we have a full roster. So today we'll talk about game theory. On Thursday I'll talk about algorithmic fairness, which is a new area in sort of algorithms and machine learning that I'm personally quite involved with right now. Next Tuesday we'll talk about interactive proofs, which is again another research area of mine. And on next Thursday we'll talk about fair division methods, or how to cut a cake fairly. So again, these are just general lectures that might be of interest. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the world of, I guess, algorithms that you can't really cover in a class, especially in sort of a first level grad class like this. So the idea is to sort of give you a little teaser for other interesting topics that are out there. Each of these could be, you know, a course or multiple courses in their own right, but at least if I give you a little bit of a taste of what they're about, maybe some of you are interested, maybe you want to read more about it, that's the hope. Right. So today I want to talk about algorithmic game theory, which is sort of you can think of it as an offshoot of game theory in particular. And it's come about in the last 15, 20 years, primarily because of the internet. And there are 2 quotations here that are kind of interesting. And they'll make more sense as we go on in the lecture. The first is by Scott Schenker, a researcher at Berkeley, who sort of said that the internet is an equilibrium, we just need to find the game. In other words, and as we'll talk about this in a bit, if you think of a game as being played between a bunch of players, or even 2 players, there is something called an equilibrium, a sort of a stable point of the game. And a lot of game theory is about finding these stable points, and that's what he's referring to, that the internet has discovered some stable point, we just don't know what the rules of the game are that allow it to get to that point. The other point actually brings us much more to the question of algorithmic game theory as opposed to game theory. So economists have, you know, argued for decades about the market forces and the reason why free market is important, and how, you know, at least if you believe, you know, if your way of thinking is in that direction, why a free market helps sort of efficiently distribute resources and in a way that any kind of top-down structure system might not be able to. And in one sense, they're right, with the caveat of hopefully eventually. And that's kind of where computer science comes into the game, where it says, well, yeah, maybe your system, your rules, your market will eventually come to some kind of well-behaved, stable point where everything is efficient. But how long will it take to get there? And even if it gets there, is it the right place to get to? And that's somehow that has been the twist, if you wish, between that computer scientists have brought into the study of game theory. Not so much does there exist, but how long does it take and is it the right place to be? And so this quote by Kamal Jain, who used to be a researcher at Microsoft and is now working other places, said, basically, if a laptop can't find the equilibrium, the market can't. In other words, if we can't characterize how long it takes, we don't understand how long it takes to reach an equilibrium of game, again, this important notion, then we should be blindly trusting that the market will somehow figure it out for us. Right? If you're essentially solving, not in this case, but it's an NPR problem, then there's no reason the market should be able to do any better than an algorithm should. Okay? And so I will talk a lot more about these things as we go on the lecture. And so again, feel free to interrupt, ask questions. This is much more casual than our. So of course, everything starts off, at least the modern conception of game theory. People have been playing games for eons, right? But the modern conception of the theoretical discipline started off with a book by von Neumann and Morgenstern back in 1944. So it's been 70 odd years since the founding of game theory as a modern intellectual discipline. And its applications have been, innumerable. So, of course, voting systems, how to design elections, how to vote for your favorite figure skater in the Olympics, as a slightly less important example maybe. Of course, all over economics, the study of game theory is scattered all over the place, and people are getting Nobel Prizes on a regular basis for working game theory, so I don't need to talk about too much of that. Biology has had, there's been an interesting way of thinking about biological sort of evolution as a game theoretic process, where essentially organisms or genes, if you wish, are competing for resources. And while you can't always argue that this is exactly what's going on, it's a helpful model to think about how organisms interoperate, how societies build, and so on. And of course, in computer science, again, I repeated auctions twice because there's the if you think of Google, people say Google's a search engine company, but really Google's an advertising company with a search engine business off on the side, because that's where they make all their money. And so auctions, of course, and how you place ads is a core part of Google's business, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Just understanding the nature of equilibria, how long it takes to get to one, how can we classify the complexity of finding equilibrium, how to build efficient markets and mechanisms, so as computer scientists, we always think, okay, how can we design an algorithm for a problem? In the realm of game theory, the design of the algorithm is design of the game. How do you design a game to get to a desired outcome? And that's something that people think about. And even something, so far removed from game theory as lower bounds, are often thought of in game theoretic terms. In other words, you think of an algorithm playing a game against the adversary. The adversary is trying to win by making the algorithm take a long time. The algorithm is trying to win by not letting the adversary make it take a long time. And the language of game theory is deeply embedded in how we think about lower bounds and how we reason about algorithm design. Okay, and that just comes out naturally from the way we think about these things. That's adversarial model. So these are some of the areas where where all these things kind of show up. And so what I want to start off with is a few kind of classic examples of games that you may have heard of already, and just use them to understand some of the issues that are at stake when we talk about game theory. So you've all heard about the prisoner's dilemma, and if you haven't, I'll explain it. So, two suspects in a crime are caught and taken to the police station. If you've ever seen Law and Order, you've seen the scene 100 times. They're put in different rooms, and each one is told, the other guy there is spilling his guts, he's going to rat you out and you're going to be in trouble unless you spill your guts first. And of course the other guy's being told the same thing. And so you can model this as a very simple game theory problem by saying there are two prisoners. Each has a choice. They can either confess or they keep silent. Right? If they both keep silent, the police have no evidence. They're bluffing. So they can catch them on some ticky-tack crime, but they really can't do much with them. So we'll say that if they both stay silent, then the penalty they pay in terms of amount of time spent in jail will be, let's say 1. So I'll write it this way to say this is for player 1 and for player 2. Okay. Let's just say, actually let's make this Okay, so they'll spend 2 months on some tequila. If they both confess, then of course they will get the same punishment. They will still get some benefit for cooperating with the police. So it'll be more like ceremony. And of course, what's interesting is if one of them confesses and one of them doesn't. Right? So if player 1 stays silent while player 2 confesses, player 2 gets a bonus for confessing and gets only 1 month jail, while player 2 gets 5. And of course, the other way around is if player 2 stays silent and player 1 confesses, we end up in this situation. Right? What should the players do? This is the question. So this is a game. Every game or two-player game like this has some kind of cost matrix, right? That says, okay, this is the cost of taking various actions in the game. This is also what is called a simultaneous game, because the two players are going to make the decisions effectively simultaneously, which means neither of them knows about the other person's decision before they make their own. Okay? So you can now start reasoning about what players might do. And if you look at this game, obviously from standing outside, you say, well, both of you just keep your mouth shut and things will work. The problem is that is not a stable point in the game. And it's helpful to think about why that might be. So what happens if the players decide to keep their mouth shut? What could go wrong here with this cost matrix? Remember, they can't communicate with each other. So each of them thinks, okay, I'm a criminal, but I'm also a smart game theorist. And there are many of those. So I was going to make a bad joke here. I know that the right thing to do in this prisoner's dilemma game is to keep quiet. So I'm going to keep quiet. And of course, you hope the other person is doing the same thing. What can go wrong? Yeah?
I mean, probably the other person can think he will keep quiet. So I can probably confess and then get the lesser punishment and then...
Exactly. So if I understand game theory well, I think, I don't know, we'll keep silent, but if I confessed, then I'll get a lighter sentence. And the other person's thinking the same thing. If they both confess, suppose they both confess, they get a penalty, right? But there is no incentive for any of them to change their mind, right? If I confess, it doesn't matter what the other person does. So if you look at player 1, for example. So let's say player 1 confesses. So player 1 has either this option or this option. No matter what player 2 does, confess or not confess, I'm not going to do any worse than 4 if I confess. So regardless of the other person's decision, if I make the choice to confess, I do no worse. I will not, have a worse than this. 4 is going to be what I get. Similarly for the other player, because this is symmetric. So the choice of both stay silent is optimal. It's the ideal outcome. Depending on the police or the criminals. But if you're the criminals, the ideal outcome is for both of you to keep quiet because you get the total minimum amount of time. Whereas the stable solution is where they both confess. And when I say stable, I mean specifically that it's what is called a dominant, and I'll come back to this point in a second. It's a dominant point because my decision is independent of what other people might do. I can make a decision all by myself. And this already shows you with this simple two-person game that because of the way the game is set up, what might be the right thing to do or the optimal thing to do is not what is likely to happen when you assume selfish players, which is the model for game theory. Okay? Now, if you think, I'm a computer scientist, I don't really care about prisoners as such because I'm honest, law-abiding, non-hacking. This idea of the prisoner's dilemma, you should think of this as an abstraction of a certain kind of game, where there's a coordination required. Well, there's a kind of coordination among players, and their choices can affect each other in a certain way. For example, suppose you have two ISPs, and I don't know if you've taken a networking class, you know that ISPs have peering agreements with each other. So if my ISP wants to send some packets to some other remote entity, I'll send packets through some intermediate ISPs. There's something called the BGP, the Border Gateway Protocol. There's a way to do this. And these ISPs basically work on trust. You know, like I will send you some packets, I'll take your packets, we'll all kind of agree to do this. It's a miracle it all works, but it works. So let's take you have two ISPs there. So they're kind of stylized, but they have two junction points, C and S we call them, where they can send packets to each other. Okay, they can't send packets everywhere, but it's peering points, C and S. Now S1 wants to send a packet to T1, and S2 wants to send a packet to T2. Okay? And we're worried about how long it's going to take to send the packet. That's the measure of cost here. Now, if S1 sends, so assume that T1 and T2 are really close to S, to the S point there. So if S1 wants to, if S1 sends its packet to T1 via the further peering node at S, which costs it 2 steps, then it actually gets to T1 very quickly. And similarly for ISP2, this is both symmetric here. But if S1 says, well, I don't want to waste bandwidth on my network, I'm just going to peer it off to C, which is closer, and then worry about it, and then let ISP2 worry about it. The problem is that the more locally efficient solution for ISP1, send it to C, will end up costing them both more if they both make the same argument. The one that looks locally less optimal works out much better for both of them. And I've chosen C and S deliberately. You can see the parallel with the prisoner's dilemma. Think of the ISP1 and 2 as the two prisoners, and C and S as the confessors, stay silent nodes. So even though the prisoner's dilemma is an abstraction, it's an abstraction that captures a certain class of games. And in particular, you might have an actual game involving peering arrangements where you get this. And of course, you could imagine, and this would be a little fun thing to do, if you change the cost function here, the game dynamics will change. It's not one of those things where arbitrary weights don't matter. They do. If subtle changes in these things will make a difference. For example, if 5 was a 3, then the whole game will change all. And so that leads you to the point of, okay, if I'm going to design a peering agreement and I want to design certain costs, I have to keep this game theoretic concept in mind when I design costs. And that's what we call, it's called mechanism design. We'll get to that. Okay, so this is a simple example of a game with a simple, actual application of this game in a somewhat more realistic environment. So this is prisoner, and I'm sure you've all sort of heard of prisoner's dilemma. Let's look at another example. So there's a climate summit going on in Paris right now, and there's all kinds of grand proclamations about how much each country is going to do to help control pollution. Of course, we've been having climate change problems for 30 years. Why isn't anyone dying? So let's try to understand this in a game theoretic way. So we'll call this a pollution game. It's also called the tragedy of the commons. So you have N countries, okay? And each country could do some work to control pollution in its country. Let's say it costs 3 units of work, of money or whatever you want, to do the work to control pollution in its own country. Okay? If you don't do it, everyone's cost in terms of dealing with pollution goes up by 1 unit. Right? So every country that does pollute and doesn't do anything about it, adds 1 unit to everyone else's cost, including itself. So from a country's point of view, if I do pollute, I pay 1 unit. If I don't pollute, I pay 3 units. Okay. If you think this is again unrealistic, every time there's a big smog flare over the Midwest of the country, you have Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, all bitterly arguing about whose job it is to deal with smog. This is happening in Indonesia right now. Indonesia is producing all the smog. It's going over to Singapore, and Singapore is saying, "What the heck?" So this thing is real. Okay? So if you think of this as your game, where every country can either choose to pollute or choose not to pollute, what do you think is going to happen? It's not hard to reason about what the stable point is. For me, locally, it's much better to let everyone else deal with the pollution and not do anything myself, because it only costs me 1 unit to do so. And so I won't. And if one country does it, the other one says, hey, well, they're freeloading, I'm going to freeload too. And if you quickly reason this, you realize the only stable point is where everyone pollutes. What does it cost everyone? Everyone pays N cost as a result of pollution. Okay, just remember that. So the total cost is N squared. There are N countries each paying N cost. Okay, what's the optimal solution? Everyone controls their cost. Now everyone pays 3 units. The total cost for the world is 3 times N. Way less than N squared. But of course no one's going to do that, because that one freeloader is just bothering. So you have this game called, and that's why this is called the tragedy of the commons. You're talking about a common resource. In this case, the environment in a more stylised case, maybe a park, where everyone has an incentive for the environment to be pleasant, but no one individually has the right incentive to do anything about it. And that's why you have problems with any shared public space. No one wants to take responsibility, no one does anything about it, and everyone waits for someone else to do something. Okay? So this is a real issue, and this is partly why it is very hard to enact any kind of global efforts with climate change or dealing with pollution and greenhouse gases, where everyone's going to have to pay some price to do so, because of dynamics like this. One freeloader can just poison the whole thing. And again, there's a more sort of computer-friendly example of this, if you wish. Let's look at this example here. Suppose I have bandwidth sharing. Okay? So suppose there are a bunch of entities using a shared connection. So I'm at home, it's evening, it's 7 o'clock, I try to go online, and suddenly everyone in my neighborhood is watching Netflix, and I can't. It doesn't happen to you, it happens to me. In fact, I've tracked my speed from between 7 and 9. My bandwidth goes right down. So everyone's using the shared channel. And if you use cable modem, that's what's going to happen. And everyone has a certain amount of traffic to send on this channel. So let's say the channel has one bandwidth, capacity if you wish, or bandwidth, and everyone has some XI. Okay? Now if everyone sends all their desired traffic and sum of XI is more than 1, no one gets anything because the channel gets clogged. Everyone's traffic gets rejected. Okay? So the status model, you could imagine other ways of doing this. But let's suppose that everyone doesn't get clogged, right? So the total amount of demand is less than 1. Then let's say the value you get in terms of how much effectiveness you get is your actual bandwidth times some discounting factor. So you can think of this as saying that things slow down, right? The closer the total bandwidth usage gets to 1, the more your traffic is going to slow down. Right? If this is 0, then you're fine. If this is 1, then you're not getting anything through. Okay, so let's say this is the model for the amount of value I get from sending my traffic. Obviously, what you want is to maximize value. You want everyone to get as much value from the traffic as possible. Send it as quickly as possible. Again, a common shared environment, an incentive for everyone to sort of manage their bandwidth and send off only a little bit, but a lot of incentive for one freeloader to say, oh, everyone is being good, I'll just send a whole bunch of stuff. Can we analyze this? It turns out you can. So you can now say, okay, let's analyze what a particular player might do. They're all symmetric, so we'll just assume we have one player. So you have let's look at the amount of demand on everyone except our player I. So the value for I is xi times 1 minus t minus xi by definition. You can maximize this expression, figure out what the maximum value of vi is, not hard. Basically xi will be 1 minus t over 2. And this is true for all players. So if every player has to have a bandwidth that equals 1 minus the sum of the rest of the players divided by 2, you can work this out. Each player is going to send 1 over n plus 1, the n players. And the total value is 1 over n plus 1 whole square. The total value for all players is 1 over n. Because again, a simple calculation, you can just work this out. But what is the optimal solution? Well, let's just say, for example, notice that this value is independent of t. It's like a really small, it just gets worse and worse as you add more players to the game because everyone's behaving selfishly. But if people were cooperating, suppose everyone had a total bandwidth of, say, half or some constant, doesn't really matter, and you wanted everyone to have a certain value, it's not hard to see that you should be able to get a value of 1 over 4 just by doing this calculation, by definition. So you could potentially get a 1/4 value, 0.25 value. What you're actually getting is 1 over n, which is much worse. Why? Because everyone is operating selfishly in this game, using the commons as their own resource. No one's willing to back off from it. And because no one's willing to back off, or even one person not willing to back off, the only stable equilibrium for this game is where no one's backing off and you suffer. So again, the choice of the game makes a huge difference. The way the game is structured can change how actors play, where we assume that actors are looking out for their own interest. And in a kind of a distributed environment, there's no reason not to assume that. Okay? We're not playing repeat. If you're playing repeated games, then it gets a bit more complicated. So both these games had equilibrium. They weren't very good equilibria, but they were equilibrium points, stable points where there was no incentive for any player to change their strategy at that point onwards. Let's look at another game. So let's think of the classic sort of hitter versus pitcher duel in baseball. Okay? So we have a hitter, we have a pitcher. And F is for fastball, C is for curveball. Let's say the pitcher has 2, you're not knuckleball. Okay? So when does the hitter win? The hitter wins when what the hitter guesses the ball is going to come as is in fact what it comes as. Right? So in this case, The payoff here is going to be a 1 and a -1. And here again 1 and -1. The hitter hits the ball, the pitcher does not. The pitcher wins if there's a mismatch. The hitter is expecting a fastball against a curveball or vice versa. So the payoff here would be -1 and 1, -1 and 1. Okay? So this is the payoff matrix. You can say, okay, what is the equilibrium for this game? It turns out there is none. You can prove this. In other words, there's no single strategy you can adopt as a pitcher or hitter to win this game. Which is good, it's what makes these games interesting. There is an equilibrium of a different kind, I'll get to that in a bit. So not all games have an equilibrium, right? You hope that a game does. You hope that a game is an equilibrium where there is no incentive for you to change your position, regardless of what people do. But you don't always have that. Sometimes you have nothing. Okay? So the basic goals of game theory, at some level, are at the very basic level, is there a winning strategy? If you have a game, you're playing, Go, or you're playing some other game, is there a winning strategy for player 1? Is there a winning strategy for player 2? And that's the first question people ask. The second question you're going to ask is there an equilibrium point? Right? Is there a stable point that the game will converge to, assuming selfish wins? And is that stable point a desirable point? And the last question, which gets us into mechanism design, is how do you design a game to get to a desirable equilibrium? So one is where the game is, the rules are fixed. You don't have any choice, you just want to know what the destination is. The other is where the rules are not fixed. You can design the game and you want to know if it's a good equilibrium at the end. Okay? This would be an example, for example, of designing a voting system. I want to design a game where people vote to get a desirable outcome. A popular candidate gets elected. So these are in the big picture, this is all what game theory is about. I mean, there are other things, but at a high level, this is what people ask. Any questions so far? Before I, move on? Any thoughts, comments? Yeah.
This may be related to what you're going to talk about, but do they study, because those payoff matrices had specific values, do they study the general form of any values?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, under what conditions on the values in a payoff matrix can you say that this game is a stable equilibrium?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely one. Okay. All right. So we've talked about equilibria. In fact, the equilibrium we saw for the prisoner's dilemma was what is called a dominant equilibrium. Namely, every player is happy regardless of the others. So regardless of what any other players do, I am content with my strategy that I've designed just based on my own information. And that's going to be the optimal form. Not optimal, it's going to be the best strategy I can. Again, not every game has this property. But if a game does, it makes analysis of the game very simple because every player just makes a decision. It's a local decision making. And of course, the prisoner's dilemma is one example where you have such an equilibrium which is not optimal. There is an example of a dominant equilibrium which is optimal. And this is what is called the decree second price auction. So, if you ever bid for something on eBay or any kind of auction site, you know how auctions work. People bid, and at some point someone wins the auction and gets the object, gets a reward. The most obvious way to design an auction is to say, okay, I'm auctioning off, one homework relief for this class. How much are you willing to offer me for this homework relief? And you all look at me like I'm crazy, but maybe you start bidding. And cupcakes. I'll give you 1 cupcake or 2 cupcakes or 3. Before it gets too illegal, so yeah. Anyway, at some point someone says, I will give you 50,000 cupcakes. Okay, fine, you win. This is what is called a first price auction. Right? So the first price wins. The problem with the first price auction is that the winner's strategy depends on what everyone else is bidding. Right? If I need to know what everyone else is bidding in order to bid something higher. Otherwise I won't win. It could also be that I end up offering 50,000 cupcakes for 1 homework relief, which really isn't worth that much anymore. And of course, you see this happen when a frenzy comes out, when any new Apple product comes out and people go online and try to buy something that they could have just waited 2 weeks for, but they go crazy and try to buy it in the first day and then the prices just go crazy. Or you go for a sports game. So this happens all the time, right? And so you're paying much more than what you value the object at, because in order to win the game, you have to worry about what everyone else is bidding. A second price auction works slightly differently. And this is how most auctions are run. You all bid 50,000. But if you bid 50,000 cupcakes for this homework relief, and the next highest person bid 3, you win the auction, but you pay 3. So the winning bid pays the second highest bid. Okay? In a sense, you've reduced a little bit, it seems maybe, the dependency on what other people are doing. You're going to pay, you have to bid higher than everyone else, but what you pay is going to be, only the second price bid. But it still seems like, you need to, in order to win, you still have to bid the highest amount. And it turns out, and you can prove this, but I won't do that here, you can prove that the optimal strategy for every player is to bid what they think that homework relief is worth to them, personally. So if to me it's worth 3 cupcakes, I should bid 3. I should not bid 4 or 5 or 1 or 2. I should bid 3. You can prove that this is optimal. For me, it's in fact optimal for everyone. So this auction has a number of nice properties. First of all, it is strategy proof. In other words, there is no incentive for me to change my stated bid. It doesn't help me at all to lie about what I really think this thing is worth. It only helps me to express my true value for the homework. So it's also, so there are different terms, and I'm not being very rigorous here. These are slightly different, but the basic idea is that incentive compatible. So in other words, you state what you expect it's worth and you win. It maximizes social good. And what that means here is that from the point of view of the auctioneer, the person who values it the most will get it. Which is good for them because they get the most value for the object. If you set up an auction where something happens and the person who values it the least is going to win it, the person will be happy, the auctioneer will not be happy because they're not getting much value for the object they're selling. In this case, that's not true. You maximize the value of what you make. So there are many, many good things about this auction. It is also a dominant equilibrium. My decision depends only on me. How much do I value the object under it? Okay. And this is what is typically used in sort of these auctions for a single object. Things change when you have multiple objects and they're indivisible or divisible and all, but this is the basic. It's called the Decree second price auction.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what in a first price auction would make you ever bid higher than you thought the object was worth?
If you to win. I mean, you could say, I refuse to bid more than what I think it's worth. Right?
Yeah, why would you bid more than you value it? Why would you want to win if you had to pay more than it was worth?
Well, okay, so you have to start, so the way you define this is that, okay, your valuation of the object is the value of the object minus the price you pay for it. So if I valued it at 10 and I paid 5, my net value is 5. Or rather, if I valued it at 10 and I paid 4, my net value is 6. Okay? That's a number I want to optimize locally. Okay? But if I don't get it, I get value 0.
Yeah.
That's the catch. So there's a choice between value of 0 and value of price minus value minus the price I paid for it.
I mean, wouldn't the equilibrium end up being where everyone was bidding such that they got just minimal value?
No, because if everyone bids minimum value, one person will see an advantage by bidding slightly higher. And they'll win. So if everyone said their value was kind of okay, we all values in the 10 to 12 range, but we're all going to bid 1. Someone's going to see, well, I could bid 2 and get it. My profit will be 12 minus 2, which is 10, instead of 12 minus 1, which is 11, but I still get 10 profit instead of 0 profit.
Why wouldn't you?
And someone will say, oh, wait, 2, okay, I can go higher. Then that's what happens.
Okay, why wouldn't people end up bidding until their value is almost 0 but not quite?
I would have to do the analysis, and I'm not sure I can do this on the fly here, but you can actually prove it. Yeah. I can either prove it or you can go to any auction site and see how people go nuts, but that's a different story. But you can prove that that auction will not have these properties. So the first price auction will not have these properties. That's what I'm trying to say. The second price auction does have these properties. That your best option is to state your true value and bid that value. Because then if you don't get it, then it was okay. You were never going to get it anyway at your value. You'd have had negative return value, so it'd be fine. So 0 is better than negative value. That's what's basically going to happen. Yeah.
So does this kind of invalidate the idea of eBay sniping?
How eBay exactly implements some of their sniping effects, I'm not quite sure. My understanding is that they started off with second price auctions. How many layers they put on since, I'm not sure. Yeah. And this has been well known, for a while. Right? So this is not a new thing. Okay. Okay. So again, the second price auction as opposed to a first price auction or any auction is a mechanism. The mechanism is the rules of the game, and the consequence is the equilibrium you get, which has nice properties to it. So design mechanism, prove properties of the equilibrium. Design algorithm, prove properties of the result. So in game theory, mechanisms are algorithms. The equilibrium are the properties we want. Okay. All right. So let's look at a different kind of equilibrium, a much more common kind of equilibrium, which goes back to John Nash, which is a Nash equilibrium. Same Nash, beautiful mind, blah, blah, blah. The Nash equilibrium is slightly different to a dominant equilibrium. Namely, a player has no incentive to change their strategy, assuming no one else changes their strategy. Okay, so in the dominant equilibrium, a player is no incentive to change regardless of what everyone else does. They can be changing strategies 10 times over, I don't care. In Nash, there's an equilibrium if no one else moves. So if everyone else stays fixed, I have no benefit from moving. So think of it like a local optimum. Right? There's no incentive for me to change, assuming the landscape is where everyone else is fixed. If someone else changes, then all bets are off. Okay? Of course, every dominant equilibrium is a Nash equilibrium. That goes without saying. A game may not have a Nash equilibrium. We saw this with the hitter and the pitcher thing. It doesn't have an equilibrium. But the thing that makes Nash equilibrium so powerful is this theorem that Nash proved back in 1951. That says that every game has a Nash equilibrium if you allow mixed strategies. So of course you've heard me harp on this time and again in this class, randomization is your friend. This is another example. Suppose you have a strategy, think of the hitting pitching example, where your strategy is not to pick to either expect fastball or expect curveball, but to toss a coin. And based on that coin toss, decide which of the two strategies you're going to adopt. So it's a randomized strategy or a mixed strategy, where with some probability you pick one, with some probability you pick the other. In that setting, you can show that every game has a Nash equilibrium, every finite game. So finite number of players, finite number of strategies. Okay, so it could be a multi-dimensional matrix with a multi-dimensional rules. This is a very, very strong result. It's guaranteeing an equilibrium if you allow mixed strategies. If you are so inclined, this is an example of LP duality. If you are so inclined, you can prove this basically. You can think of LP duality as saying the same thing, but I'm not going to get into that. And this is the power. This is why, in some sense, it's like a founding theorem of game theory. That every game does have a Nash equilibrium, where a player is no incentive to move, assuming no one else moves. And the Nash equilibrium for the hitter and pitcher case is basically a coin toss. With 50% probability you pick fastball or curveball. So the best strategy for the pitcher is to truly be as random as they can. Not say, okay, when the count is, I'm up in the count on a fastball, or I'm down the count. Just literally mentally toss a coin on every pitch and just do it. No one ever does that. It's impossible. It's just humans don't function that way. But that is the optimal strategy. If you want to beat the batter. And for the batter, it's the same thing. Okay. So that's the basic setup for how games work. You have an equilibrium, you have different kinds, and there are many, many other kinds of equilibrium, by the way. There are things called correlated equilibrium, coordinated equilibrium. It's just a whole bunch of things you can talk I'm not going to talk about any of that, because again, I take a whole course on this topic. But this is how we like to think about these problems. Design set of rules, find the equilibrium. So let's now talk about mechanism design. In other words, can you design a game to have a desired outcome? And let's talk about the most basic kind, things that we studied for hundreds of years. Yeah.
So the point of the equilibrium is to maximize the profit of every player.
No, the equilibrium is where the game will end up.
Yeah.
If every player plays according to their own selfish needs.
So, and the hope is with an equilibrium that it ends up with a good outcome for
Right,
people.
and that may not always happen.
What if you want a bad outcome for people?
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. You have to then design a mechanism to make that happen.
Oh, okay, because you just find an equilibrium that's a bad case for it.
You have to design the game rules to make that happen. Right? The equilibrium is a function of the game. You design the game, and then you have to prove, if you can, that that the natural equilibrium or Nash equilibrium. You can have multiple Nash equilibria in a game, so even then you can't be quite sure where things will end up. Just like multiple local min and a cost function.
Because I guess as an example, like at the auctions, what if you're a seller that wants to maximize the amount that people pay?
Right.
Okay.
Right. But remember, an auction that maximizes what people pay is not going to be very popular to the buyers. An auction that minimizes what people pay is not going to be very popular to the sellers. Which is why the Victory second price auction is nice, because everyone gets what they want. The sellers get, basically the best valuation possible, which is, reasonable. And the buyers pay whatever they value. Yeah.
Wouldn't, if you're the seller and you can choose between a first price or a second price option?
You prefer the first price.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but the buyers won't.
Oh, okay. I thought you were.
Yes. So this is kind of, if you balance everyone's needs here. When eBay wants to encourage people to put their stuff online, they want to say, look, as a seller, you'll make good money. When they want to encourage people to buy things online, they say, no, don't worry, you won't spend a lot. They have to balance both forces here. So this is a way to balance them out. And where you can prove that everyone's happy. Or at least is not unhappy. Right? No one's getting an edge. We'll talk about this more when we talk about cake cutting. There's a difference between getting what you want and making sure that no one else gets something better than you. There's a different dynamics here. I mean, most people are okay with getting something as long as they're sure that no one else is getting a better deal. Right? That's the nature of psychology. So this is a game where no one's getting a better deal. You may not get much, but they're not getting much either. It's here. Okay. So mechanism design, voting. How do you design an election system? People, of course, have been thinking about this since the beginning of democracy. How do you design a fair voting system? And this is, of course, a very, very rich topic, a very controversial topic. You have people who feel very strongly about these things, and I'm not going to get into that whole mess. But let's think of it more abstractly. The voting problem is really the following question. I have every player in the game has individual preferences, and you want to combine them into some global preference list. This is a bit stronger than election. Election, you only want to elect one person. But let's say you want to do a rank ordering. You want to assign gold, silver, bronze, right? Or you are a meta search engine. You're getting search engine results from different, you issue query to Bing, to Google, to other and then combine them in some way. So this idea of voting applies not just to actual voting, but any system where you have rankings that you want to combine into a global ranking. Okay, and this could come in many ways. And let's set up some basic, things we'll call reasonable things. First of all, we would like the property that if everyone agrees on the ranking, then the output should be that ranking. Seems not unreasonable. If everyone says that, apples are better than oranges, then the output should be apples are better than oranges. Hopefully it's uncontroversial. We don't want dictators. We don't want one person's vote to count over everyone else's. We want everyone to get a fair shake. This is a democracy after all. As long as you have enough money, your vote should count. So, sorry. So no dictators. You also want no strategic voting, right? So you'd like an election where you express your preferences honestly. Remember the second price auction? I said the best thing for you to do is express your true value for the item, and everything works fine. You'd like that here too. You want to be able to express your true voting preference and have that be reflected, rather than saying, okay, I want the Chinese figure skater to win, so I want to vote for the American one because that'll change the rating scheme. And this has happened, by the way, as you all know. This happened in what is it? Which Winter Olympics was this Canada? 2006, I think, or one of them, where there was a lot of gamesmanship going on between the different judges to get deals being struck. I'll vote for so and so, you vote for so and so. They had to revamp the entire voting scheme and use a bit more math in it to make sure that doesn't happen again. So you don't want strategic voting, you don't want dictators, and you want unanimity. Okay? And again, I'll remind you that the preferences are being expressed as a rank ordering. So the only way I express my preferences is by saying I like A better than B, B better than C, C better than D. That's it. I'm not giving anything else. A very famous theorem proved by Kenneth Arrow, the Nobel Prize winning economist, a long time ago, basically can be summarized as or no. Think of this like a if you wish, NP Harness result or Gödel's incompleteness theorem or some whatever you want, some kind of limitation. That if you want a deterministic voting scheme where your preferences are expressed as rank orderings and you want to have a global ranking that has these properties, this cannot be done. Now, before you run out screaming that democracy is all over and we should go back to dictatorships, there are lots of caveats here, right? This is, and that gets you to the whole realm of social choice theory and voting theory. But nevertheless, there is this barrier. You cannot go beyond this. Of course, as computer scientists, we should be, or we are, trained to think, well, that's all well and good. But is there a caveat? And it turns out there is. This was a result proved in the late 80s by Bartholdi, Tovey, and Trick that said, so in other words, if you can game the system somehow, you could break any voting scheme, because Arrow says you can break the voting scheme, you can have strategic voting. So yes, democracy has collapsed, but it's an NPR problem, so maybe it hasn't collapsed quite yet. So Arrow's theorem is, again, in some ways the foundation of social choice theory by saying what cannot be done. And like most theorems of this kind, they are useful not for what they tell you cannot do, but for what assumptions they need in order to tell you can't do something. In other words, Arrow's not saying that you can't design a voting scheme that's fair. You're saying if you want a voting scheme where things are expressed as a rank ordering in this particular fashion and you have a deterministic aggregation scheme, then you can't. And of course, all these caveats are things where you can say, well, maybe I can break them. And it turns out you can break them. And I should mention that a follow-up result by Gibbard and Satterthwaite showed that even if you just want a winner, you forget about a ranking, you just want a winner, the same problem happens. You can't guarantee these things. Okay, so it's not just for the total ordering, even for just getting a winner of an election, like an actual election.
Question?
Yeah.
So I'm struggling to understand what it means to do an NP hard computation to defeat a voting system.
So in other words, Arrow's theorem says that if you had a scheme that had unanimity and did not have dictators, there's a strategic voting scheme to break it, to get whatever result you want. Finding that strategy is NP. So there's a backdoor to your voting system, but it's going to take you a while to find it. It's like saying that, with the crypto system, if I can factor large integers, I can break crypto, or at least RSA, but I have to factor large integers.
So what size am I measuring NP hard against?
So this is typically, I guess, n players and a total order ranking of n candidates, something like that. I'm not sure exactly the deal, but that's how you parameterize the problem.
So
the number of players, number of outcomes.
That I know how other people are going to vote?
Pardon me?
Or do I have to assume I know how other people are going to vote? Or is that not part of it?
I think you need to know the rules of the game.
Just the rules of the game.
Yeah, and I don't know how much.
How many people are going to play?
I don't know how much of a coalition you need to make this happen. Like, you need 1/3 of the people to be participating in this strategy proof thing or not. I don't know. I don't know the details of this proof. But that's how you do it. You'll say, okay, I need to know the rules of the game, and I need to have at least 1/3 of the population working with me to defeat the scheme, or something like that. Some minority, basically. If it's a majority, it's fine. Right? The point is, you don't want a minority to be able to take over the election. Right? So I don't know if any of you are sci-fi fans and have followed the whole brouhaha of the Hugo voting scheme. Any of you sci-fi fans? Hugo Awards? Nothing ring a bell? One? Yes. So you've heard, yeah, okay, so yeah. There was a question back there.
I'm just wondering, like, if someone proves P is equal to NP, then that's the end of real democracy, according to this.
Yes, if we prove people let me, that'll be the end of democracy. But we prove people let me, that's awesome. Forget the democracy part. I mean, we're busy, you know, our whole banking system's going to collapse. Forget about democracy. I think there are bigger problems here. Well, no, but I wouldn't go that far. I think you can defeat such a system, yes. That doesn't mean you can't design different systems that different. Again, do you believe these properties? Maybe strategic voting is okay. Maybe you can live with it. There's nothing wrong with strategic voting per se, right? You know, if I'm sitting in Utah and I happen to be a Democrat and my vote is getting wasted, you know, there are all kinds of games you could be playing here, right? I mean, so you should take these assumptions not as, you know, laws of we must do things this way, but as, you know, a suggestion. Granted, we don't want dictatorships, and we'd like unanimity. But even, you know, the first one, you could imagine flexing this a little bit. These results are very brittle usually. You take away one assumption, then the whole thing falls apart. So, you know, it's not that bad. Yes?
So even though it's NP hard, how well can we approximate the scheme?
So what does it mean to approximate? There's a discrete outcome here, right? So again, you have to define this now. And I'm not aware, and I don't know if there's results on doing that. There might be, but it depends on how you define a number that you're approximating as opposed to a decision. Right? Are you going to find a ranking scheme that's close to the true ranking? I don't know. There could be ways of defining this, yes. But that's good. And this is the thing I want people to take on this class. When someone says NPR, you say, well, how can I approximate? That's good. So I'm glad you brought that question up. And can I toss coins in the process? Okay. So there's one of those rare occasions where money is a good thing. Well, not rare. Where, remember what I said about Arrow's theorem? I said you are given your preferences as a rank order. In other words, I like options A, B, and C in that order. It may be I like option A way more than option B, and option C is kind of like option B. I'm not allowed to say that in Arrow's theorem. All I can say is it's A, B, C. They might as well just be numbers in the line. But if you allow people to express more than just a way of comparing two things, in other words, if you allow them to express how much they value each individual choice, and then use the valuation as a way to rank, you can do better. And this is one of those things where I said, you know, you have to be careful what the theorem is saying and what limitations it's putting on you. So the power of money here is that if you express your preferences not just as a relative ordering, as an ordinal, but as a cardinal, where you have total ordering on evaluation of outcomes, then in fact, you can design a scheme that will maximize social welfare, that will break Arrow's theorem. This is called the DecreeClarkRoll Mechanism. I'm not going to get into this, but the victory auction is a special case of this. So again, Arrow's theorem says that you cannot do good social choice if you have preferences. This result says if you express your preferences with more structure on them, using a valuation of some kind. So in other words, everyone's on a common platform, right? They all express valuation in some common unit, which you can think of as money or something else. You can do better. You can break Arrow's theorem and you actually get a fair mechanism. So that's why all is not lost. As long as you know. So this whole vote with your money thing is not as bad as it sounds. I mean, there's a game theoretic reason to think about things like that. Okay. All right. So all this is yes.
Is this based on the assumption that everybody has the same amount to vote with?
It doesn't matter because I'm generating a rank order from, well, I see.
Like if I have player A has 10,000 points and player B has 10 points, then rather than, you know, in the first game, they each had equal voting power.
Right, so the way to think about this is that, yeah, so there are a lot of definitions here that I'm eliding that we need to be more careful about. In other words, what does it mean to maximize social welfare? How are you valuing the result? So again, you might value in terms of each player's individual value or some average of this kind. I'm not as familiar with the details of that. But there, yes, you have to define it in a particular way. And I don't know if you need to scale. Maybe you can assume all valuations are between 0 and 1, and that will take care of that problem. So yes, you might need to set a common range for the valuations.
So that each person's vote is equal. But you can kind of divvy it up.
Right, something like this, yes. Again, the details of this mechanism would explain exactly what it is. Okay, other questions? So of course the thing you all want to know is how does sponsored search work in Google Ads? And I'm not going to tell them because I don't know either, but I can give you a basic high-level idea of how it works. So what is sponsored search? Of course, you go do a search on Google and you see ads. These ads are based on many, many different things. They're based on the kinds of people the ad agency wants to target. They're based on your IP address. They're based on geolocation. They're based on which browser. All kinds of things. But fundamentally, what does an advertiser want? Right? They're putting ads and they're in slots, and they want you to click on something. Right? At the very least, you may not buy anything. They want you to click on it. So like, yeah, look, someone clicked on our ad. Give us money. And so, if you sort of think about this way, what a general tenet of belief, and again, you should take everything I'm saying with a whole pile of salt, because I'm not an expert on this, and the people who are experts won't tell you. But basically, the rule of thumb is that if your ad is higher up on the page, it's expected to be more prominent and more likely to get someone to click. So let's imagine that you have slots. So I have a search query, right? So let's say the search is for flowers, or something like that. And I have a number of slots. I have slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, slot 4. These are slots on the page. Right? And the belief is that different slots will give you different rates. So there is something called the click-through rate. Is if I click on the slot here, or what's the chance that in response to the search query, someone's going to click on this thing here. Okay? And this is what's called the click-through rate, or CTR. This is the bread and butter of sort of sponsored search. CTR. What is the CTR for a particular slot? Okay. And so let's say we have n bidders. We have n slots, and Aij is equal to the probability of clicking on the ad for advertiser J if in slot I. So in other words, some companies are so famous that wherever they are, they'll get clicked on. Some companies are more obscure. So you have to, it's not just where you are, but who you are. So advertiser J slot I. Okay? This is what's called the click-through rate. Okay? And we'll assume that, our assumption is that for all wait, did I get this right? Yeah, for all j, Aij is greater than or equal to Ki plus 1 comma j. In other words, for any particular advertiser, you're going to get more click-through if you're higher up in the list. It's kind of a basic assumption. Right? And each advertiser, so the advertiser bids Bj, saying I want to bid this much to put my ad. They don't get to bid which slot they're in. They get to bid. I want to put my ad on this result. Okay. And so now, what's happening? Almost every second, every microsecond, is that based on these bids, the search engine is deciding how to place ads and what to charge each bidder for what they placed. So it's a general auction. You're auctioning off slots to bidders. Okay? And so they rank all the scores. They ask each bidder to play whatever they need to hold their slot. So typically, there are different mechanisms for doing this. So for example, different companies might say, okay, pay something like, let's see. Pay something like the bid you made divided by some function of the slot you're in. Okay? Or the next slot you're in. So you pay some discounted factor based on the bid or some properties of the slot just below the one you're in. Just like in the second price auction. Okay? This is what is called a generalized second price auction because you're dealing with multiple slots and different bidders. It looks like a Decree auction, but it isn't. In fact, a lot of the basic questions about the properties of this auction, is it incentive compatible and so on, are unknown. At least at last I checked. I'm not, and there's also lots of complications because some advertisers will say, well, I don't want to pay anything if you put me below slot 3 because I don't care. and so on. So there's lots of other constraints. All this is happening online, so you can't just take your sweet time trying to figure out who's going to build what, who's going to be paid what. It's all happening in microseconds. There's some very nice talks that people are giving about how they build these with online, it's basically online matching schemes to match people's slots and all. But this is the bread and butter of the advertising industry on the internet. How do you decide who's going to be in what slot and how much you're going to pay? And a lot of very basic game theory and a lot of other machinery goes into designing these options. Again, a mechanism you're designing to make people work. You want advertisers to get value for money. You want them to feel like if they're paying something, they're going to get enough click-through rate for it. But again, you want to be fair. This is not the only place where mechanism design comes up, of course, in computer science. If you're doing, for example, P2P stuff, you have your bunch of BitTorrent clients, and the system needs to figure out who to trust, who not to trust, how to downgrade people's bandwidth based on what they're doing or not doing. You have to build reputation systems. There's a lot of work on building what are called reputation systems for these distributed entities. How do you trust someone? Can you trust someone with a good reputation? You trust them more. How do you make sure that bad behavior will lower the reputation in a game theoretic way? Right? Because they're doing it actually. Prediction markets, who's going to win the next election, the brands that are going to go up, they're all game theoretic and people build them in. And other kinds of market theory mechanisms. A lot of learning theory goes into minimizing regret, online learning, making predictions, and so on. So there's a lot of places in computer science now where we need to understand basic game theory or mechanism design in order to implement some solution to build a system to do so. Any questions?
What is the F? EI over
Fi plus some function. So if you want to put in slot I, what you will pay is your bid divided by some properties of the slot just below you.
Okay.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
So
Yes.
in cases where, like for this game, you were saying a lot of its properties are unknown, what kind of value does game theory provide us?
It provides you a systematic way, a language, a formalism, a rigor to sort of think about this, right? So you can say, I will formalize the game this way, and now I can now say, what is the equilibrium look like? I couldn't even say what does the equilibrium look like without the language of game theory.
Sure, but if it turns out that I can't solve it for whatever reason.
Well, yet. Right? I mean, don't underestimate human ingenuity. Or you could say, well, if I change the rules of the game this way, then I can prove something. Are those rule changes acceptable to my customers? So then it provides the framework and the language and the map to sort of reason about this more rigorously instead of just saying, well, I'll just make up something and see what happens. And that's the point of using game theory. Again, it's only as good as your assumptions. If you assume people are not selfish, all out for themselves entities, then this whole thing breaks down. And in fact, people have won Nobel Prizes for dealing with, limited rationality, limited knowledge, and things like that. So there's, what assumptions you put in decide the quality of what you get out. This is very basic stuff. But this itself is already good enough to handle the auction system. So you've seen the basics of how we set up a game. We've seen mechanism design. But at a more foundational level, right, there is the question of how long it takes till we reach the equilibrium in a game. And this is a very fascinating sort of sub-area of complexity theory, which says I have a game, I set up the rules, the game sort of proceeds, will it reach an equilibrium? So we know an equilibrium always exists. This is not a problem that's NP hard, because the answer is always yes. Yes, you will reach an equilibrium. So it's not one of those cases where I don't know what's satisfiable or I do know what's satisfiable. The answer is yes, these are not NPR problems. The question is, can you say that it will get there in a finite amount or in a reasonable amount of time? So from a complexity point of view, the class that defines all of these things is what's called PPAD. It's a horrible name, but I forget the acronym. But this is the class of game theory questions. It's called PPAD. If it were in P, then all games would converge in polynomial time. We don't know if that's true. It's an open question. It's kind of below NP because every problem in PPAD is known to have a solution. So it's not a question, does it have it? And if you had to describe, if you study complexity theory, you realize that classes have an essence to them. They have a thing that they capture. P captures efficient time computation. NP captures efficient verification. BPP captures efficient randomized computation. P space captures efficient space usage for games. What does PPAD capture? PPAD captures the following fact. So you can do this yourself. And you may know this already. If you take a piece of paper, okay, and you just kind of crumple it, okay, there is one point on this paper that will not move. always, if I haven't torn the paper. Have you heard of this? Crumpled paper theorem, also known as Brouwer's fixed point theorem. So Brouwer's fixed point theorem is the more fancy name for this. But what it's saying is that if I take any kind of operation, and then I can make it more formal, you apply a certain kind of operation that doesn't change its basic topology, there will be some point on the paper. So you have to kind of do it and not move it. Of course, if I move it, everything's moved. But if you keep it there and just let it crumple, then one point will not move. This fact, that in a crumpled piece of paper there is one point that does not move, is the essence of game theory. That fixed point is the equilibrium of the game, the Nash equilibrium of the game. Every game theory problem, the question of how long does it take to reach Nash equilibrium is asking how long does it take to find that fixed point. So whenever you have a problem where it's clear it's going to end up at some spot and you need to know how long it's going to take it to get there, you are possibly dealing with a problem in PPAT. And so there's a lot of work in showing that different kinds of games show up in PPAT, or they're PPAT complete. And there's a whole hierarchy of questions around this. It gets very interesting stuff. Okay. So game theory has this sort of, just like algorithms has its P and P, game theory has its own class, PPAT, where all the natural games live. And the big open question is PPAT? And we don't know. It seems unlikely, but we don't know. But the implications are important. If PPAT is not in P, then you set up your game, it will take a long time to stabilize, or it could. And then you can't just say, well, trust the market. You have to say, well, how long am I going to trust the market for? You can't just rely on it. Because, and as another famous economist said, in the long run, we're all dead. You can't wait for long. Okay. So there's a lot of work again in this. I'm using one slide to describe a large body of work in the theory of equilibrium. But you should know that there's a very nice complexity class that captures this. And if you can't remember, just imagine a crumpled piece of paper. Brouwer's fixed point theorem. The last thing I want to talk about is, so I want to find equilibrium. I don't know how long it'll take to get there, but I get there. But suppose I got somewhere I didn't want to go. Again, if the more zealous your economist friend is, the more they'll say, no, the market will decide, the market will provide, the market will, the invisible hand of the market. But it is possible to reach an equilibrium assuming selfish behavior. That is terrible. We saw this in the prisoner's dilemma already. And so this term was coined by computer scientists, a very sort of poetic name called the price of anarchy. In other words, what is the discrepancy between what you can do with coordinated activities versus everyone being independent? And the classic example of this is something called Brace's paradox. Imagine that you're driving on the road. This is a particularly good example. So imagine you're driving on the road and you have these two ways to get from start to finish, or source to sink, as we like to think of it. There's a cost of going on the path. Maybe that this is the path with cost Cx equal to 1 basically says that x is the amount of flow going along it. The cost will be 1 regardless. It's some long, windy path, but there's a lot of, you'll always get there in 1 unit of time. The other path is a lot longer, but the time it takes to get across it depends on how much congestion there is. If it gets full up, it'll take longer. If it's not so full, it'll take shorter. So, I-15 versus Wasatch Drive or whatever. And this is what the network looks like. Suppose you have 1 unit of traffic you want to push on this. How much cost will you pay optimally? So it's not hard to say the right way to do this is to send half a unit along there and half a unit along here. Okay? The overall cost you'll pay is 3 over 2. Well, everyone will pay 3 over 2 cost to go this way. So you say, okay, well, this is a reasonable solution, but I want to make people be able to go even faster. I want to provide more bandwidth, more resources, so that everyone can get where they need to go a lot faster. So my helpful, transportation engineer says, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to add another road, because building roads is a good thing. I'm going to add another road here. I'm going to make this really super fast. Okay? So for all practical purposes, the cost is going to be 0. Okay, so I added a row to my network. Now think game theoretically. For every individual, their best option now is to go on the top fast path, come down the fast superhighway, and then go up the bottom. And of course, everyone does that. And now everyone takes long. Because now you're paying 2 units to go across instead of 3 or 2. So Brace's paradox is a paradox because it's saying that adding more resources to a system can make it worse if you assume game theoretic and selfish incentives. Because in the model where there was no bridging path, you had no choice, you might just go on the other, so people just divide them up equally. In the case where you do have this central node here, you can actually go a lot faster yourself, but now everyone decides to go a lot faster, they all go faster. This is why adding lanes to sometimes adding lanes to a highway doesn't actually make them go fast, go slow. And the price of anarchy here is basically the cost of everyone making their own decision versus the cost of a coordinated effort. It's a penalty you pay for allowing everyone to do what they want. And so there's been a lot of work on studying the price of anarchy in different kinds of groups. What is that? So you can think of this almost like an approximation error, right? There's the optimal solution you want that maximizes some value. There's a solution you're going to get from your game, and there's going to be a gap between them. So the thing is that there's some fundamental limits on what you can do with a purely anarchic system. In other words, the market not only will take a long time to get you somewhere, it may not even get you a place to get to if you design the game a certain way. So Brace's paradox is not just game theoretic, it has a kind of physical connotation as well, which is kind of cool. So a bunch of students in a game theory class at Stanford decided to do an experiment with this. So I'm going to show you Brace's paradox with strings and springs. When you think of these paths as, I'll just show you. So now you understand the paradox, I'll show you the videos. I apologize for the cheesy music. That's kind of fun. So this is a bottle hanging from a spring system using the extra wire, the extra path. Okay, so it's at 26 inches. So it's pulling down quite a bit. It's a long path it's taking. See a red in the middle? That's the interconnecting wire. And everything else is connected up with springs. So the springs stretch with more load, they take longer. The rope is fixed, doesn't have a string. So the white lines are Cx equal to 1, the springs are Cx equal to x, U1. Okay. So this is a student in the class who did this demo. So we're cutting the red string, we're cutting that intermediate link. So we're going from the extra provision highway to the non-provision highway. No, I'm not going to pause it. The thing goes up actually. It's kind of a cool thing. In other words, the path has become shorter when you've actually reduced the amount of string in the system. And once it stabilizes, you go from 26 to, we'll see what it gets to, something much smaller. There's a whole bunch of videos on the web. You can Google Brace's paradox demonstrations. It's kind of fun. This was the one that had the least unpleasant music to it. So it's a bit blurry, but it's more like 20. It's gone from 26.5 to 20. So it's actually become shorter. Your path length, your average path length has become shorter. Again, if you think of the time taken from go from beginning to end, it's become less. And this one is here. So it's not quite the 4/3, but it's getting closer. Anyway. The point is that Brace's paradox is not just a game theoretic concept. It actually has a physical sort of connection to it as well. This clever spring system allows you to do that. And with that, I'm done. I don't have any more to say. So, questions? Anyone? Thoughts? Yeah.
So seems like the game is constantly changing.
Yes.
Or for example, another example, evolution.
Yep.
It seems like, my evolution is dependent on what everyone else is,
Yep.
but everyone else is also changing.
Yep.
So it doesn't seem like it will come to a equilibrium.
So this is what is called iterated games. So for example, the prisoner's dilemma is a very good example of something where you can study iterated games. And there are these strategies like tit for tat, right? For example, in this round, if you betray me, in the next round I should try to betray you. And you can prove things like what is the equilibrium strategy in an iterated version of this game, where you can watch what happens the previous round, you can learn from it. Right? If you think a lot of machine online learning, it's basically doing that. It's doing something, it sees some reward, it learns based on that, it does something else. You think of this as a game against the adversary, or as a randomized adversary who's producing inputs for your problem. So there's a lot of work on these iterated games. And that's how you deal with things where the players can watch each other and learn and change their behavior based on what they see. So that's also a part of algorithm game theory. Yeah?
I just note, the Selfish Gene book is fairly good about the evolution. And
Yes, it is. It is a good book. Yeah. Before Dawkins lost it. It's a nice book to read, yes. Any other questions? No? Okay, very good. I will see you all on Thursday. We'll talk about issues of fairness in algorithms.